Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and today we're going to be talking about Territory Wars and kind of why I hate this game mode so much. And this was honestly my favorite game mode for a very long time, so we're going to get into kind of what happened, why I don't love this game mode anymore. We're going to talk about some of the things I think they could do to fix Territory Wars, and I'd love to hear from you guys. What would you want changed about this game mode? You let me know in the comments. Let's give it a massive shout here. That was kind of an awkward pause. Let's give a shout here to our channel members for their continued faith, support, and love. If you're ever interested, link down below in the video description, along with a link to the Discord server. Go check it out. Go join the Discord. The Discord, more than anything, guys, it's an awesome place for everybody there. Thank you for being the most amazing community. And, of course, to the Wampa and Jedi Master tier members, thank you guys for continuing to keep the faith, to bring you good content. I hope your rosters are just crushing it. Let's get in here. Let's talk about why I hate Territory War. Alright folks, so Territory Wars. I mean, this was my favorite game mode. I've no lie admitting that. This was my favorite game mode, and it was my favorite game mode up until I got involved in Marvel Strike Force, and I got to play through a couple of Alliance Wars. And man, was Alliance Wars so much better than Territory Wars in SWGO. So I'm going to show you guys the map of Alliance War and kind of talk through why I don't like Territory War. So here's the Alliance War map in Marvel Strike Force. And this is not an ad for Marvel Strike Force. There are plenty of things that I love about SWGO way more than SWGO, but I think they did Alliance War much better. So the first thing you'll notice is that there's 12 zones rather than the 10 that we have. And if you look carefully in these zones, what you'll notice is that they're kind of broken out into like two parts here, right? See how there's this clear distinction between these two zones? So the way that this Alliance War worked is that you were almost assigned a specific place to put all of your teams. So if I was assigned Flight Deck 1, I would put my teams either here or here, depending on what slot was open. And that was it. Like, I have to pick the left side, the left side or the right side here. Same thing if I was in the hangar or the med bay, right? You pick one of these two sides in the specific zone that you're assigned in to place your teams. And that's it, right? That's all that you have to do, right? Is like you pick your zones that way. And so it was really interesting because there was an element to the strategy that it didn't matter if one of your people had 20 teams to be able to place town and somebody only had 4. That person with 4 had to place all 4, and then the rest were filled up with these like garbage low power teams. And the person with 20 could only place this, 8 or whatever. Like, there was a set number that you could place, and so it limited the impact that a single player had on your alliance's success inside of Alliance War. And you think about that in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, that with the way that the zones work, there's only 2 front zones. And if you have a few really powerful members with Great Mother's Datacrons or whatever it is, and the enemy team can't break through either zone, they're screwed. So you could realistically have 2 players put enough defense here to stop the enemy guild from ever getting through. That is a realistic thing that can happen. So in Marvel Strike Force, that's not really the case. And the other thing that they did to combat that is when you look at these zones, one of the things that they would do is that, let's say I can't break through Flight Deck 1 or Flight Deck 2, but we can break through the 3rd flight deck here. That opens up the bridge, and we'll talk about the points in a second. That's another thing that I liked. But you break down to the bridge. If I beat the bridge here, if I can break into the bridge, I now have access to the armory and to engineering. And if I break through the armory, I now have access to security and the med bay. So what it allowed you to do was kind of pick through the zones that you could beat and then eventually circle back. That I could start working on the armory before I've killed stuff at Flight Deck 2 because maybe I want to save some teams. There was strategies to how you would maneuver through these differing zones, and it was really, really interesting and cool. And you think about in Star Wars, they kind of have that where you can open the middle zone by getting through one of these ones. But if you think about it, if I get to this back zone, I can't get to ships unless I've cleared these zones in front of it. The way Marvel Strike Force handles it, if you beat this back zone, you have access to ships, and you would have access then to this zone and then to this zone. It was a lot more interesting. It allowed you to kind of work your way through, and that way you could be a little bit more strategic with your forces, that if you place a really heavy zone here and a weaker zone here, well, maybe we'll go here and then we'll work our way to see what we have left to deal with this. just was, was a more interesting way. I felt it added a layer of complexity to your offensive and defensive strategy. Now, the other thing defensively is that it was very similar to Grand Arena in that when you would set your teams here, you didn't ever have to reset them. So when you think about, the way Grand Arena works, right, you have your defenses for, I can go in and edit my defense for 3v3 and 5v5 at any time. And if I make relic upgrades, right, and it's like outside of this GAC period, it automatically saves those upgrades to your account, right? And obviously during the join phase, you just have to re-update your account, right? But in Marvel Strike Force, that was happening all the time. That like it would just go and say, hey, you know what? Phil took his Jedi Master Kenobi from Relic 7 to Relic 8. His Kenobi on defense is now Relic 8. I didn't have to update that. If I wanted to change my teams, I could, but I didn't have to. They would stay there and they would increase as you increased their value. And that was really good. Now, there are definitely some negatives there because you were always in an alliance war. That like if I'm on vacation, if I'm AFK, like it doesn't matter. I am going to be there with my defense set. And that means that my alliance is then going to need me to attack. And the thing with attacking in Marvel Strike Force, very similar to the defensive structure, but the teams I could place were limited defensively, and offensively, there was an energy, right? You had this like alliance war energy that you could only do a certain number of attacks before you would run out, and it could refresh a little bit, and you could purchase some with like crystals. But you think in, Star Wars, I can attack as many times as I want. Like, I could go in and do 40 battle attempts. If I have the teams, I could do 40 attempts, and I could do 4. And it does, like, in Marvel Strike Force, that was not really possible. I would have to pay for extra energy. And so it sort of lent this idea that, very similar to what they do in the raid and what they do in TB, that they've kind of reduced the impact an individual can have. Well, in Territory Wars, that really hasn't happened. They still allow an individual to have a massive impact to the success of a guild. Obviously, one person not participating can be a big problem, but one person overly participating can completely change the guild and make it, a successful war. In Marvel Strike Force, that's limited in that you have, the impact of one player being very successful doesn't matter if everybody else isn't, right? And that's kind of, something that I thought was cool and that I liked. It made it feel a lot more like an alliance war rather than 20 of your 50 guild members crushing their defense. So that was a big thing. Now, the last thing we'll say here is the matchmaking in Marvel Strike Force was significantly better, but we're going to go back to Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes and kind of talk through that. It's no more time needed in the Marvel Strike Force map. That is just chef's kiss. So, in SWGO, the one big thing that you can do is manipulate the matchmaking. Right? The matchmaking in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes is based on joined galactic power. So right now my guild has 46 of 50 members joined in the war. So let's say that the four players that are missing, if they have an average of 12 million galactic power, my guild now has, instead of the 598 million galactic power that we have, we're missing 48 million, so now we're in 550 million. So from a matchmaking perspective, we could be facing a guild with 550 million active GP that is a 550 million power guild that everybody from the guild joined. And we could also be facing a guild that is 700 million that's missing 150 million of their active GP. It's a wide range. And that matchmaking can be manipulated and kind of, as we call it, sandbagged, so that way you can get an easier matchup. That if we told our guild, everybody who doesn't care about Territory Wars, don't join, only join if you care, right? So let's say only 30 members of the guild join. Well, we're going to get cupcake matchups most likely because you're going to be facing a guild with a similar amount of GP joined to 30 players at, 12 million each. So that's a 360 million power guild. Imagine you're going up against a 430 million power guild that has 360 million joined. Like, we're going to wipe the floor with them. So that's one of the reasons you can see some guilds with a really, really good success rate is not that it's not intentionally sandbagging. They're not singling out, Fat Phil, Wags, Brobsky, you guys sit out. It's, hey, if you don't care, please don't join because we have people here who do care. That's one of the things that those Territory War focused guilds can do at times is there's certain players there who just don't care and they don't join and they don't get the rewards. Whereas in Marvel, you were always there, so you always got the rewards. Now, speaking of rewards, perfect transition. The rewards are insane in that the difference between first and second on the surface level really isn't that big, with the biggest difference coming in the form of Relic 9 materials, that at the top level you get 5 droid brains for a win and 1 for a loss. And that galactic power, you see that active 380 million. That's not that hard when you're a massive guild, right? 380 active GP is not that hard to get to for big guilds. So that's one of the reasons why there is this sandbagging going on, because you can miss 100, 200 million of your guild and still be in that 380 million active GP for a lot of us. Like, yeah. And a win is way more valuable than a loss in terms of the droid brains, which at the top level is important. What I think they should do with matchmaking and the rewards is add, one, for rewards, additional levels to galactic power. But for matchmaking, they just need to kind of use the GAC method. You see, GAC's matchmaking is actually perfect. The issue in Grand Arena is skill rating. Skill rating is absolutely ass. Like, it is awful. Like, skill rating is ass. But the matchmaking is perfect, because think of the last time that you ever fought somebody who doesn't have the same skill rating that you do, right? It doesn't happen. I don't get paired up with people with 3,700 skill rating, and I don't get paired up with people with 3,000. I get paired up with people with 34, 35 skill ratings. So, while the skill rating system's awful, the matchmaking's good. In Territory Wars, the problem with the matchmaking is that it only looks at your join GP and not your guild's total GP. So I think all they have to do is make it so that way they say, all right, Sigma Mandos is 598 million. They can't face a guild higher than 618 and lower than like 578 or something, give or take, you know, whatever numbers they want to use. That we're going to be inside of a range that's the guilds will get matched up with. So first it's the, you know, the GP of your guild. And then they say, all right, they're 598 million. They joined with, you know, 550. Let's find them another guild with a similar amount of join GP in their size range. I think that's the way that matchmaking should be handled in Territory Wars. And you can have a wider range of guilds, because obviously at the top level there's some different things. But, you know, there's ways to do this successfully, and I think they just haven't really implemented them. And that goes into the rewards even, that this sandbagging could completely change if what they did is maybe said, you know what, all we're going to do is change that the loss rewards are going to increase for higher level guilds. And that way what you're in essence, you know, trying to accomplish and do is that going, you know, 500 at, you know, the top level of Territory Wars would be more beneficial than getting first place all the time in 380 million. And for those of you who are going to sit there and say that sounds like participation rewards, think about the Premier League. Would you rather win the championship, get relegated, win the championship, get relegated, or would you rather be Crystal Palace and be a mainstay in the Premier League? Like, Crystal Palace fans recognize that it's much better to be a mid-table team in the Premier League than it's ever to be the best team in the championship, because you get more money. There's more rewards for being a mid-table team in the Prem than being the best team in the championship. Like, why do you think it's such a big deal to play in the Champions League? Even with fourth place, you're like, oh, what's the big deal of getting fourth? That's a hell of a lot better than playing in the Europa League, and it's a hell of a lot better than playing in the Conference League. Good Lord. Chelsea, absolute shambles playing a Conference League. But that's the thing, right? Like, you could be the big fish in the little pond, or you could be the small fish in the big pond. But in the big pond, you're going to get bigger rewards. Like, it makes, you know, that's kind of the idea here that I think they're failing to grasp, is that I think a lot of guilds, you'd see a lot more join GP, a lot more activity if there was, you know, some incentive behind it, right? And that's, I think, my biggest complaint with Territory War, really, is that, you know, the droid brains to me isn't enough of a, like, I can't care enough to try and go for that when you're going to make me lose anyway. And I'm not going to go try to find a guild that purposefully sandbags, because purposefully sandbags, in essence, it's not, like, you can still purposefully sandbag by saying if you don't care about Territory Wars, you don't join, right? Like, that is purposefully sandbagging. I don't want to hear it. But it's not, you know, like, I don't fault you for it, because it is smarter to do that. You know, my guild, we're just like, hey, you know what? We're going to play for second place and we don't care. That's literally what my guild does. And that's kind of a scary thing when you think of a guild of my size. Like, we don't care about Territory Wars. And there's probably other guilds who feel similarly. And that's problematic for CG, because this is one of their flagship game modes. Like, Territory Wars Territory Battles and Grand Arena are, in my opinion, the 3 flagship game modes of Star Wars. I think Conquest could be considered a 4th. I just think it's a little bit too hated, where like TB, Territory Wars, Grand Arena, kind of the biggest followings of that's what people hone in on. And the fact that this hasn't really been updated in years is kind of jarring. So I'd love to see them take more of this approach with the way Marvel Strike Force does things. Kind of limit the impact one player can have offensively and defensively. Put the guild as a whole. Like, encourage the entire guild to participate because you could get more rewards because there's more GP. Like, I feel there's a lot more things you can do to encourage that and have that be a priority in this game. But you guys let me know, what changes would you make to Territory Wars? Do you actually think it's perfect? Like, you're like, Phil, you're an idiot. This is the best game mode ever. I'd love to know what you guys think. Please like and subscribe. Comment. Thank you all so much. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, my friends.